Now on Zero Block 30, I am privileged to have a World War II veteran. I've told you guys many times that whenever I get a chance to sit down with a legend, I always do it. I was invited here to talk to Bob Sweatt, World War II veteran, gunner, and an absolute hero. Sir, thank you for joining us. So let's just get started with your story. Whenever you joined and you knew that you were going to go fight in World War II, what were some of your initial thoughts?
Well, I'd always liked war. I was raised in New Mexico, and our closest neighbor, I think, was 6 miles. And we'd go over there maybe once a month. And he was in World War II, but back in 1918. And I thought it was just a bunch of fun. I didn't know it was serious. And until I was interned in El Paso, and I went to Salt Lake City, and we all had to get in with the pilots. We took the same physical they did, and boy, they were tough. I mean, there's about 100 of us went over there, and I think it's about 25 passed. Well, anyway, I saw this lieutenant standing on a box, and he said, "We're just getting a blank kicked out of us all over the world." Said, "We desperately need aerial gunners." And I never heard of an aerial gunner. And he said, "Now there's a rumor going around that the life of an aerial gunner is 3 seconds." He said, "That's a bunch of blanks." Said, "It's 17. I said, "Put me down." He said, "You sure?" I said, "Yes, sir."
So you went from being a young man in New Mexico who went to a high school where you only had 17 students.
That's right.
And you rode horses to get to school to give people kind of an idea of the kind of town that you grew up in. And I also remember reading that you said when you were growing up, you didn't have any idea of being a war hero or anything like that. You just wanted to be a cowboy, right?
That's all I knew. Yeah, my father told me I was so ugly when I was born that the doctor slapped my mother.
So, and after leaving there, getting some training, what was the training like for you? What was the training process?
I went to Las Vegas, Nevada, and we trained and there, and they thought I was a real good shot because we had BB guns, but they had sealed 2 cylinders, and they shot hard as a .22. And I'd shot a BB gun all my life. Mm-hmm. And they thought I was really good because I'd kill birds on the fly. Mm. You know, I could give them a lead.
I knew. I mean, you went to school with 17 people and rode a horse. I imagine you shoot a BB gun.
Yeah. And they thought I was really good. And, of course, I'd been doing it all my life. I was about 7 years old.
So when did the process start of how to shoot from a plane? Was that different from your marksmanship back on the farm? Obviously, a little bit different than actually shooting.
Oh, yeah. We had it... They had a chain on it so you couldn't shoot somebody. Because, you know, people over there, they turn their gun every which way.
Yeah.
And they could shoot you and kill you. BB was sealed 2-cylinder, boy, they shot hard as a .22.
Whenever you were flying around and you got to shoot the guns and actually train on your job of being a gunner, what was that like for you? Oh,
well, we had a railroad track, and they had this flag going around it. I guess it's about a mile around it, and you had to get so many shots in this in the flag, or you didn't pass. And then you stand in the back of a truck, 2 of you, and they were throwing a skeet at you, and you had to hit so many skeet or you couldn't pass. Boy, it's tough.
Did a lot of people not pass?
A lot of them didn't pass. Yeah, and I think there's about 25 of us out of 100 passed. The hardest thing was they'd draw a line about 3 inches wide, and you had to put 1 foot in front of the other, and the line was about 6 feet long. And we were right in with all the cadets. Mm-hmm. And fact is, we were all pilots. The pilot I flew with, Captain Dave Wilhite, he called us together one time after we were flying over Germany, and he said, "I'll ring the bell if I can. If I can't, get the heck out of this place." And you're all smart enough to know if we're in trouble.
Goodness. I'm always amazed when I speak to World War II veterans, too, because you all seem to know everybody's name. I try to remember folks' names that I served with just from a few years ago, and you don't. You're 97, so that must have really stuck in your mind. While you're training for World War II, and you're trained to go overseas for the first time, what was your idea about the war? Did you know a whole lot what was going on? Did
No.
you know what you were getting into?
No, I didn't know anything. I was just ignorant.
Right.
I wasn't smart at all.
So, did you see news stories or things like that whenever you were getting ready to fly over? That this is a pretty serious deal.
We had, you might have heard of Access Sally, and she had a lot of time over at English Channel, and the radio operator would call me. I'd be pulling pins out of the tail of a bomb, and he'd call me and say, "Sweatt, listen to this, so and so," and she'd tell us our mission, and we knew it as well as she did. She said, "The IP, that's where you go first. You go to the IP, and then you turn to the IP, and the bombardier takes over. And if it's on an enemy or German shore, you just drop your bombs whether you can see them or not. You don't care where they hit."
Gosh.
And, that's kind of bad there. You drop it on school or orphan's home or any place, hospital. But on friendly places, we brought it back and dropped it in the English Channel, or I put pins back in the tail fuses.
Wow.
And I could blow the whole bunch out there if I messed up.
Did they give you much chance when you actually did arrive after you left your training and you actually arrive into the European theater? How many days or how many weeks did they have before you actually started operations?
Let's see, I think I was over there about 2 weeks before we had a mission. And it was really just an adventure is what it was. Because the pilot, he said, "I'll ring the bell if I can." And he knew he didn't have any control over anything.
And what does that mean, ring the bell?
He didn't ring the bailout bell. Get out of this thing.
Okay, so that's whenever you would
Yeah, he'd lost. And I might tell you a little story about this. It's, of course, one. I think I could have done better navigation from a road map at 5 mile high than he did. But we had navigational problems every time. Anyway, we were carrying 1,000-pounders. I don't remember the mission, but it was in Germany, Hamburg, or one of those places like that. And we got number 4 engine knocked out, and the rest of them stacked around us, and we just barely had enough to gas to get back to the White Cliffs of Dover. We went right over the White Cliffs of Dover, and of course we didn't know it at that time, but that there was a Spitfire Hurricane base about a mile over there, and we got into. We flew over. We were about I guess maybe a minute over land, and the pilot called the navigator, the engineer. He said, "We're out of gas in number 2 engine. Transfer the gas in number 2 engine." Or in number 3 engine to number 2, and he feathered number 2, and we had 1 engine. And he said, I heard him holler, "Get out of that nose, we're going in." And he made
was he pissed at the guy that made the mistake? That seems like a pretty big mistake.
It was a big mistake.
An idiot.
Now, a top turret gunner told me this, so I'm just repeating what he said. And so he made a 160-degree turn. I bet we wasn't 4 feet above the treetops.
Wow. And
landed in a beet patch. And the Royal Air Force came out and picked us up. And we had guns and all of our equipment. We carried it with us, parachutes. And went over there, and they fed us while we waited and called our base to get them to pick us up. And they had real pretty girls waiting tables. And we didn't have that. We had old ugly boys, They said, "Get
And
the
I went
Blake
and
out of
looked at you
here."
a little bit earlier, and I know you like your ladies. Like I saw when we were going through the cafeteria, you're not shy about saying hello.
And this ball turret gunner, we all borrowed money from him. He was from California. He was a Jew. Of course, there's nothing wrong with Jews, but we all borrowed money from him. If you borrowed 50%, you paid him back $1 payday. And anyway, this girl, she talked to Snyder, and she said, "What's that thing you got on there?" He said, "That's a Mae West." She said, "What's a Mae West?" He said, "Oh, that's to keep us," said, "we can only live 5 minutes in the North Sea if we're shot down. If Air Sea Rescue doesn't pick us up, we can only live 5 minutes." And he says, "You want to put it on?" She says, "Yeah." And I knew what he was going to do because I'd seen him inflate it many times. And anyway, he put it on her, and he had a strap that's 6 feet long and went between your legs. And he pulled it up and pulled his dress up to about her knees, but she didn't seem to worry about that. And as soon as he snapped it on this side, he pulled both CO2 cylinders. That thing got 3 feet across.
Oh, wow.
And pulled her dress up, and we had a vaudeville show going there. Now, I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression, and it's just a lot of fun, but it was a little fun. She had pretty legs, I'll say that.
And after being shot down, you're probably glad to see any nice legs again after going down. So that was plane crash number 1. But that would be enough for most people. It wasn't enough for you,
that just one plane crash.
Right.
And, well, a little later, I think I don't know, maybe a time or two later, another navigational error, and this was from the tail gunner. And I was flying the right waist, and his engineer was flying the left waist, flexible gun, and Kepling was flying the tail. And he called the pilot, and he said, "Went over Saint Nazaire, France, 100 miles off course." And he said, "We got a direct hit on the plane that's flying right behind us there." And he said it barely missed my tail turret by about 10 feet. And he said I could see the man in there, and he didn't have a parachute on. You couldn't wear a parachute. And so, things like that. I didn't pay attention to it. I heard so many stories. But think of the ones that my whole crew were dead. They all got killed. And there's 4 of them, I believe, buried in the cemetery right there on the beach.
Normandy.
What's the name of it?
Normandy?
Normandy, yeah. And there's 3 of them in Belgium. And there's 4 of them in Belgium. And I went to the tail gunner's funeral. I went up there. He's from Eaton, Ohio. And they brought his body back. And then the navigator, he was a good navigator, but he was 100 miles off course. Anyway, he called, Jimmy Stewart. You've heard of Jimmy Stewart.
Yes,
He's a movie star. He was with us the day we were shot down. And he broke protocol because he wasn't supposed to call, but he did anyway. And he told, now I read this in his book. I just quoting what I read. And he called Colonel Caldwell, who was command pilot there with the whole group. And he said, "You're 100 miles off course." And Colonel Caldwell said, "Mind your own business. I know what I'm doing." And he didn't know because he was. And when we were shot down, while the navigator was talking, he called and he called the pilot and said, "Make a 90-degree turn to the right." And he hadn't gotten it out of his mouth until the plane just seemed to stop in midair. And I saw number 3 engine with the prop still turning on fire past my window, but I didn't know number 2 engine was with it. And it threw me to the left side of the plane, and my head and parachute was out were between the machine gun and the fuselage, and the thing blew up. I couldn't breathe, And I remember saying later on, I was talking to some people there, and I remember saying that I felt like I weighed 500 pounds, or 500 man was standing on my chest. Of course, I couldn't breathe. And the thing blew up, and I don't know, I guess it knocked me out for maybe a few seconds, because when I came to, I was falling, but I couldn't tell I was moving. Everything was just right there. And I guess, and I remembered from physics that you fall until the air pressure on the bottom equals the gravity pulling down on you, which is about 120 miles an hour. But that's pretty darn fast to stop all of a sudden.
Right.
And anyway, I guess I fell for probably a mile and a half, 2 miles. And I could see the trees. I kept watching for the trees, and they were right under me. Boy, when I finally got the chute open, and
that process of getting it open, you said earlier that you felt like somebody was talking you through it, like you almost had instructions going on in your head, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seemed like I had someone telling me what to do. I couldn't tell I was moving. The only way I could tell I was moving, I had pockets in my fleece-lined pants, and they were ripped off except the bottom, and they were just flopping. That's the only way I could tell I was moving.
So when you finally get to the ground, walk us through what happens. What's going on in your mind? Are you know that you're in enemy territory?
No.
You're not?
I had no idea where I was.
You had no idea where you're at. Probably 100 miles off course.
And I kind of had a pretty good idea where I was. Because I think I could have done it with a road map as good as our navigator did. Well, I know he was good. He was bound to be, and he was from New York, and he was brought back and married in a cemetery there. But his name was Rodman, and anyway, I never talked to him. I didn't know we had. I think he had 1 or 2 girls. He was the only one. He and the pilot were married. The rest of us were 23, 24 years old, and. Then I landed. I just made a few swings out on the ground. I was real low, and I landed, and I saw this guy. He was in a small plane, kind of like a Piper Cub, and I could see his face, and he could see me real plain. And I scraped off some of the top leaves and so on, and got some mud, and I had the jugular vein cut in my neck. And I scraped off and got some mud, and I had the jugular veins cut in my neck. And every time my heart breathed, it hit my collar. I had a collar turned up. It was about 8 or 10 inches, I guess. And I could see it hitting my collar, and I didn't know what to do. And so I just scraped it off and finally found some mud and put there and stopped the bleeding. I know I talked to the doctor when I got back over here. I was telling him about it. He said, "Are you crazy?" He says, "You could have get all sorts of diseases."
That's
from
what
it.
I thought when I read your story. I was like, these guys didn't do nearly the amount of training, like, because we would have known what pressure dressing and apply clean gauze and everything like that. I saw that you cover yourself in leaves, and that's great. Like I thought, maybe a little bit of survival training, but definitely no first aid if you're packing it with mud.
No, they didn't say anything. I never heard anything about that. I said, "Well, doctor, what would you do if you were bleeding to death?" I had to do something.
Yeah, true. And you're not thinking about it. You're just wanting to get to the next day. If you get to the place where it gets infected, then you're fine.
I guess that's what I thought. I don't know. But I wasn't afraid. That doesn't mean I'm tough or anything like that. But I lost all fear of death, I guess.
Right.
All I want to do is survive.
I've talked to so many veterans who have unbelievable stories like yours, and that concept comes up a lot, where they talk about in their first couple missions, they were scared. Like whenever they were going, like they flew over different things, or they were in different type of battle going house to house, and they were really nervous. But after a while, you almost become numb to it, right?
You do. I can't explain it. You're not afraid. And
it's a little more dangerous. Like it's scary. Like looking back, like I can't believe my plane just got shot down. I'm here. I'm almost bleeding to the death when I'm putting blood in my
I didn't think
neck.
about that. All I think about is surviving, I guess.
Right.
Well, anyway, I could substitute in there another little story. I'd go right along with it. we left Paris. The night before we left Paris, we went into the...
And how did you get to Paris?
I go back to where I was shot down, and I stayed with two people, Mr. DuPont, who was in charge of everybody putting fertilizer.
Jeff Gordon's sponsor.
Well, you understand fertilizer. That's where I was headed. And and I I covered up, and I went back down to where I was shot down. And I don't know why I did this. Your idea is good as mine. I just started scratching out a place around a tree. Trees were about 2 or 3 feet apart. They was about 8 or 10 inches in diameter, and about 1.5 foot thick. Just leaves, icy leaves. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember being cold, but I know I was, because it was 3 feet of snow on the ground. Well, anyway, I covered up, and the Germans came by, and I had to do that real fast. So anyway, I covered up, and they passed by me there with 6 or 8 feet there between us for all afternoon. And they were laughing, talking. Most of them were real young kids. And they looked at me, but all they could see is just looked like it was something else. And nobody ever came over and tried to see if I was moving or anything.
Were you nervous in that moment every time you heard their footsteps go by? Because I just try to picture it, and it just sounds like a movie.
I can't hardly answer that question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know you think I'm trying to say I'm tough.
No, you don't have to prove anything to me. I mean, you've already proven that
I'm
you
just trying to survive, that's all. And anyway, Mr. DuPont came back, and I think this little boy that saved my life, that gave me a pair of pants and a shirt and a beret, he really saved my life, because they thought I was a German or a Frenchman working. And anyway, he came by and picked me up in a 2-wheel cart, and it's just about dark. And I know I talked to Maurice DuPont. He was about 18. He was with the French Underground. And he said, I was worried about you, because we went down this road getting back to Mr. DuPont's place, and said the Germans were about 20 feet apart with a submachine gun. Each one of them had a submachine gun. And said, you were looking at every one of them. He said, I was kind of worried about you.
Jeez.
He said, well, anyway, I stayed there for about a week. And one afternoon, I was sleeping over there in her loft, and she came up, and she was so nervous, she was just shaking. And she had her sons, that boy I was talking about, Maurice DuPont, she had a new suit, or his suit, I guess it's the only one he had. It was a good-looking suit. And I wore that for 2.5, 3 months. Mm. That's all I had. And anyway, I put it on, and the next morning, before daylight, Mr. DuPont came in and got me up and put some clean hay on me, covered me completely up with hay, and we went over about 2.5, 3 miles to Mr. Deneau's. He had 2 little girls, 7 and 9, and they delivered messages. They were all in the underground. Mm. If you can feed your kids like that, delivering messages. And I know this little girl came to see my wife, and I went back about 25 years later. And she said she was a grandmother. And she came by, and I talked to her quite a bit. And she didn't know much about me. She knew I stayed there. She remembered it, but she didn't... no incident ever happened. I stayed there about, 2 weeks. And then the sheriff and his wife in a 2-wheel buggy came by and picked me up one afternoon about dark and carried me about 2 miles over to a railroad station. It's just a railroad car sitting off the tracks, and turned me over to a man that, now I'm guessing here, it looked like he had a sack of corn on his back. I don't know what he had. But anyway, he and I rode together. He had his wife with him, but he and I sat together, and we went by, and he took me up to these, I was staying with, he delivered me to 3 boys, and we were staying in this hotel, And I was staying with one of the boys, and the other two stayed, I think, first room there in the hotel. The other one was just a long row of rooms. And I got up one night, I must have been about 12, 1 o'clock, to use the bathroom, and it was down. They only had one bathroom per room on that hotel. And I was in there, and I heard the Germans come by. I locked the door, and I don't know, I used the bathroom. A little later, I went back to the room, and I had locked it. I had a key, and I opened it and went in, and that window was half up, and there was a tree growing right by it, and it's covered with snow. And all the cover was off the bed, and he hadn't even closed the window. And I went in, and I could see where he was really messed up, and I heard the Germans come down the street above me, or in a room there by me. And I locked myself in, and I thought about trying to go out through crawl down that tree, but afraid to slip and fall. And so I stayed there until the next day.
So they were going hotel to hotel, room by room, looking for GIs or looking for anybody, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And they had some girlfriends there, and they jitterbugged a lot. They listened to jitterbug music, and they had some old records that you slip on. I don't know, they looked like a tomato can, but they slipped on, and they'd dance, and I've been over there with them, but I never danced with any of them. I just went over and listened. I never talked or tried to talk, because I couldn't afraid to speak.
Right.
And,
so when you finally got to the place where you saw American troops again, what was that like?
Boy, that was mostly cussing.
Yeah.
And
happy cussing? Or
everything you could think of.
What took you so long to get
none
me?
None of us had spoke English for about 3 months. Well, anyway, there were 6 of us on this train going in from Paris to Gong. That was right across the street, White Cliffs of Dover. And, of course, it's a little town. And we went through a minefield, and this Canadian, I know he was an undercover agent. He was a colonel. And I knew the pilot and his co-pilot real well. They were in our organization. And he came out before I did, the trip, I think, before we did. Anyway, he would give this colonel, he had all of his serial number, and he threw a bayonet and stuck it about 3 or 4 feet of his face, stuck in the door. And his co-pilot told him, says, Ralph, you better tell that man, he'll kill you. Says, you better tell him your serial number. And he did. And he said, if any people make one noise, making noise or anything, said, I'm going to cut your throat right on the spot.
Wow.
He said, you'll stop this escape route is secret. Nobody had ever been down it but 3 or 4 times. And they had a gunboat. They parked about a mile off shore, and came in rowboats and picked us up. There was, I think, 4 rowboats came in and picked us up. And I know they took me out. I thought they'd never get in there. But I was the last one to get out. And I think there was 2 more that wasn't supposed to have been in there, because we had the water, I bet, within a half inch of the surface. And I thought I picked it up and put it in and poured out a lot of it, just scooped it out. And finally we got up there, and I was the last one to go up the rope ladder on the side. And they put me on they had 2 diesels. They called it a gunboat, 403, I believe. Larry, are you on the boat?
No, he's not on the phone.
Oh, you're not? Well, anyway, if you can get him on the phone, you might. Anyway, there was 2 RAF pilots and 2 American pilots and 4 RAF pilots, Spitfire pilots, and Hurricane. And we went in and they fed us, and we called them our field there to get a plane to come in and pick us up. And after the girl got her dress down and everything, I felt sorry for her because she was so embarrassed, I tell you.
So when you finally got to speak to your mom and dad, because I imagine it had been months, and you got to tell them what happened to you.
Yeah, I read the telegram. It was a colonel. He was a lieutenant colonel, I believe, or colonel. I can't remember which. And I read his report. He said, "We're sorry to." Says your son, Robert H. Sweatt, has been reported MIA, as missing in action, and said if anything comes up, you will be notified immediately. And that's all he said.
So for months they had no idea.
And I know my sister, I talked to her after I got back. She said my father wouldn't even go to town for 2 weeks because people would ask him questions and he didn't want to answer them.
Man.
You know, and I knew everybody in town.
And you're such a small town, right? Everybody knew who you were and they knew your story. When you finally got to go back home after returning, what kind of hero's welcome did you receive?
Well, they thought I was important, and I wasn't. I had to maintain radio silence
that's
again.
that humility that people talk about World War II veterans. Like, it's definitely important. It's an unbelievable story.
This is Hobbs, New Mexico. You've probably heard of it, I guess.
Oh, wow. So this is the story.
That's my
whenever you
wife
first came
there
home.
on the...
Okay. My goodness. So just so you know, while you're listening, you hand me a story of a paper. What is this picture? You're a handsome fella. Handsome fella. I'm going to take a picture of this and put it on Instagram.
Well, I see it.
So I
need a pair of glasses.
See, now it all starting to come around for me a little bit. Now that we've told your story, and there was a spot that he left out whenever he was actually in Paris, that there was a young French lady who, whenever he was walking through and he was wearing a suit, they would hold on to his arm and just speak to him in French. Well, now I see why.
Yeah.
I see why now. Good looking dude. So, when you came back after World War II, what did you get into after that? What was the rest of your life?
I went to, I started to jet school, and he told me I could go on to jet school or quit and go to college. You had to have a college education to fly jets.
Because you didn't have the experience, right?
And so I went to college. I was a geologist. My wife and I both went on $120 a month.
Wow.
So you can imagine how that was. We had one girl, and I know once a month we get paid.
Tickets now.
And we had a beer joint right across the street from the University of Houston. And we'd go over there, and most of them didn't have enough money to buy maybe one or two beers. And there's a man in there, and he said, and he'd say it every month when we get paid. He'd say, now if I say something that you agree with, you say, yay. If I say something you disagree with, you say, boo. He'd say, let's buy a beer joint. Of course, everybody say, yay. 1 bar, boo. 100 feet long, yay. 1 bar made, boo. For each and every man, yay. That is so silly.
Another thing that I learned about you.
I mean, you've been in a position like that.
Oh, yeah. One other thing we talked about during lunch that I wanted to get the listeners to hear. I found it very interesting that whenever you would fly together, that you and the troops with you would sing songs. Do you have a favorite that you still hum to yourself? Who's that?
Well, kind of my favorite. Every one of the gunners and the officers had a song, they'd sing. But some of them you couldn't repeat in mixed company. Boy, they were
on this show you can.
And the pilot had one that golly.
What was one of your favorites that you still hum around that your kids and grandkids like to hear you sing it?
Well, I don't know. It wasn't anything like I thought it'd be. I never had any idea I'd ever be shot down. I thought that was something that happened years before, it would never happen again.
Right. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining our show, Mr. Sweatt.
Well, did you get
really
enough out of it to write a story or something about it?
Well, we're going to play this interview. We're going to play the conversation that we had. So you're going to be listened to by the largest military podcast audience that there is. I wanted to ask you a question real quick, if you don't mind, if I can hand your son the microphone. So you growing up with a World War II legend like your father, I hear so often that from the World War...
He was born.
Right. But from the perspective of being the son of somebody who fought in World War II, was it something that your dad talked about much when you were growing up? Were you kind of aware of it at all?
Well, he belonged to an organization called the Air Force Escapee Evading Society. Mm-hmm. So that's really kind of how it got started. For a long time, we didn't really know too much about what was going on. But anybody that was shot down in occupied territory, they started this group. And from that point, when we got to meet those fellows, and they told similar stories like my dad's, Dad became a little bit more open. But really what he spoke with us about that stuck with us through our whole life was the camaraderie that he enjoyed with the guys on his crew, and they came from all walks of life. There's guys from California and New York, and they always made fun of Dad for being a dumb cowboy from New Mexico. But probably the greatest regret that I guess that he, or one of the regrets that he has about that is we never got to meet them, because he spoke about them our whole life. Wow. We knew that some of them were jewelers, and one of them was a fruit stand owner, and then guys from Ohio and Georgia, and Dad just always spoke so highly about those guys. That stuck with us as a young.
And how old were you when you kind of realized, like, my dad really had been through some shit in his life?
Probably when I was about 8, 9, 10, around that age, when we really started actually speaking with other World War II vets, and that's really when the whole story came out. And then I think in 1969, he made a trip with Mom back to France and got to meet the people that was the first meeting since they saved his life in that small town right outside of Paris. And then we got to go over. And so it's kind of a special deal, we're here only because they helped him.
Right.
To escape. And so that whole, once again, that camaraderie thing comes back.
Right.
So we basically grew up understanding what that means, when you form that bond with people.
No doubt.
For in those situations that it's hard to describe exactly how deep they go. No and doubt. The gratitude and that sort of thing. So,
and Bob's grandson is in the room with us as well. He's a Marine, if you want to hop on the mic for just a second. So I know that you grew up knowing the stories of your grandfather doing war, like that he went to World War II and what happened to him. As a Marine, we concentrate so much on learning about history and having respect. Did joining the Marine Corps for yourself give you a newfound respect for your grandfather? I'm sure you grew up respecting him, going to his farm and working on the ranch and doing things like that. But for you as a Marine, after you went through and learned history of World War II from a military perspective, did it give you a whole another appreciation for your grandfather?
I mean, I've always, like you said, I always grew up, I was attached to his hip ever since I was a kid, just doing farm stuff or ranch stuff. But it was like, once I joined, it kind of molded our relationship differently at the time. So now, because since him, other than the author of the book, my Uncle Larry, there's no other veterans in our family. So it was kind of, once I joined the military, it kind of molded our relationship and definitely gave me go to boot camp and learn about all the, you have all the knowledge you have to learn. Mm-hmm. And then you learn about World War II and stuff, and it just kind of, definitely did make me look a little bit differently at exactly what they did. It made me want to research it more. And then, the book came out, and I think I read the book, and I literally, as soon as the book touched my hands, I was nose deep in it.
And I have read the story before we did the interview, and I imagine, like, now seeing the picture, this could be a movie. For sure.
Oh, we've been saying that for years.
Like, it could be a movie starring Brad Pitt, handsome guy,
the most handsome military guy.
I think Brad might have to do it. He might be getting a little bit older now.
Shout out to Brad Pitt.
Yeah,
come on the show.
Mr. Sweatt, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, sir.
Yeah, we had a team with the Queen of England in Buckingham Palace. My wife and I did.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Wow. See, that's humility too, because I mentioned that soon we're going to be having somebody with the Military Cross from England come on the show, and I mentioned meeting the Queen. You met Queen Elizabeth.
Oh yeah, I talked to her. Told her I invited her to Texas, and she told me she'd come to see me.
Oh,
but
wow.
she never did.
The 8th Air Force contribution to World War II and in Britain's survival.
Goodness
And
gracious.
so she invited that escape group that was under about over there for tea.
Awesome.
So.
Well, thank you so much. That's it. That was perfect.